Welcome everybody from Nite Florence, joining you for the first time on Live, the app that allows the whole world of XR to stay in touch throughout the year and during the live shows of USA, Europe, Asia. My name is Cecilia Lascialfari, co-founder of Area6dov.com, creative technologist, aspiring journalist, and organizer of Nite Florence event. We are here with some exceptional speakers who will talk to us about an important trending topic, digital rights in the metaverse. Did you know that already in ancient Greece, there was the protection of one's personal sphere? It's stated that the birth of privacy dates back to the time when there was the disintegration of feudal society and the emergence of the bourgeois class. But we don't have to go back quite that far. In the mid of the 16th century, in Florence, Cosimo I de' Medici decided to have the Uffizi Palace built to house the seat of the judiciary, which today is one of the most famous museums in the world. To further promote rights and to elevate the importance of justice, Cosimo I ordered a custom-created sculpture at the building. In the sculpture, he is in the center, and flanking him on each side are two sculptures representing equity and rigor, concepts supporting justice, of which Cosimo had maintained the primary importance in the administration of the state. Today, the concept of privacy is a trending topic in the digital environment. That's why we called here with us to talk about this topic Marco Magnano, KRISTINA Podnar, and Valentino Megale. KAVYA PEARLMAN sent us an opening video message, which we are happy to share with you. Here with me is also my co-organizer of Nite Florence, Anthony Vitilllo. Hi, Anthony, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello, Cecilia. Hello, everyone. We are happy to be here again in this 2022 with Nite Florence. I'm Anthony Vitillo. I introduce very briefly myself. I'm in AR and VR since 2014, both as a developer and entrepreneur and also a blogger. I'm the kind of guy that tries to do many things in AR and VR because I love these technologies. And I don't know if I do these things well, but at least I try. And as I said, I'm very happy to be with you speaking about this important theme, and I'm even happier that we have a presentation video by KAVYA PEARLMAN, that is the not only an innovator, a thought leader, a hacker herself, but she is especially here because she's the founder and the CEO of the XRSI initiative, that is this institution that tries to promote safety and inclusion inside AR and VR. So without much talking anymore, let me show you this amazing video by KAVYA.
Trust, privacy, and safety will define the success of XR technologies. I remember saying these words at Augmented World Expo AWE Santa Clara in 2019, when I first took the stage to share with the world what XRSI, XR Safety Initiative, is all about, and how these technologies are going to change the world and all the aspects that we need to pay attention to. So in early 2019, just about 3 years ago, together with my co-founder, Marco Magnano, I started XR Safety Initiative, XRSI, with a mission to help build safe and inclusive XR ecosystems. And now we kind of have a word for it called the Metaverse. XRSI's mission was focused on a future that we are now starting to see come into fruition. In the meantime, though, we are already seeing the era of constant reality capture. We are in the middle of a cultural clash. On one side, there is the growing part of the population that is more cautious in giving away the data, or at least posing some questions about the use of the data. But on the other side, we have these regulations or definitions that are outdated or simply inadequate. Even the protocols, that the traditional protocols, are simply not going to protect us from the kind of risks that we will face in these immersive domains. We already know what happens when these issues of privacy and safety and security are not addressed proactively. We have seen it. We have seen it firsthand. I have seen it firsthand in 2016 during US presidential election time. I have raised my voice to further, these causes, and even sometimes felt that my voice was not heard. I know that we don't want to ignore these challenges. As we build these new realities, these next iteration of the internet, the issue is very complex. These issues, in fact, needs to be addressed globally. And that's why XRSI thinks globally. In order to define what the North Star of human-centric embodied internet, aka the metaverse, is, we have developed several programs. Our very first program was actually XR data classification framework. We wanted to understand the context of the data, because in this massive data collection era, we needed to know in what context can we share the data, in what context this all other data is sensitive. And just about a couple of days ago, XRSI shared the output of the very first global XR data classification roundtable, where we had several governments, multidisciplinary experts, researchers take part in discussing the human rights in the metaverse. And I encourage everybody to download that report and see for yourself how the health inferences, or biometrically inferred data, we call it, the inferences, are the new type of data that is seamlessly being captured and contextualized and even being fed in artificial intelligence algorithm. But we have not accounted for what happens to humans when the very same data is used or weaponized against us, or these algorithmic biases lead to decision making that could really undermine human rights. I really just think that we have come a long way, but it is really just the beginning of what is really necessary to create safety, trust, privacy, and really uphold the human rights, the digital rights in the next iteration of the internet called the metaverse. I'm KAVYA PEARLMAN, and XRSI believes in these safer and more inclusive technologies. XRSI believes that these immersive realities must remain inclusive, open, safe, and accessible to every single human being. And I also believe that every one of you, every single human being, has a role to play in creating these technologies, creating these new realities. And I really hope you will join us. Thank you so much.
I'm excited to welcome Marco Magnano, co-founder of XR Safety Initiative, president of XRSI Europe. He is a journalist with vast experience in foreign policy, human rights, and global challenges, with a background in media activism and software development. His speech is entitled "Digital Rights Are Human Rights." Welcome, Marco. Please.
Thank you, Cecilia, for the introduction. It will be not so easy to speak right after the introduction we just said, but anyway, let's uh, let's try to move in that direction. So let me start from here. Every technology has controversial aspects and can stimulate a change in the way we see the world, we see the reality. This is not only a matter of today. Let me do a long jump in the past. Let's go back to the Firenze of the early 15th century and think about the dome of the cathedral created by Filippo Brunelleschi. The dome was built without support, was the first of its kind, and changed not only the way architecture was done at the time, but also the way architectural space was imagined, like the way urban space was imagined, and so. The same can be said about, for instance, the train, which changed the human development and changed, in many ways, the size of the world itself. So today we're way more used to technological transformation. Just to name a few items in the mass market, only in the last 30 years, we have digested the internet, desktop and laptop PC, smartphone, tablets, the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 generations of social network. It's a bit difficult to say. Or the digital transition for newspapers, in my specific case, or hybrid and electric cars, etc., etc. But potentially nothing can change our identity or the perception of it as much and as fast as the convergence of immersive technologies, blockchain, huge data capture and processing, and stronger internet infrastructure. This convergence now is labeled at the metaverse, and even if I'm not exactly a big fan of the use of this word today, well, let's stick with this. So one of the fundamental bricks of this next iteration of the internet is data. And especially because we are moving to this era of constant reality capture. We're not exactly there yet, but we are very close to be constantly captured in various levels, places, and degrees. But what's the current understanding of the relationship between data and human rights? Well, it's not exactly straightforward to answer to this question because we need first to understand what we mean with human rights. So the official frame for human rights dates back to the 10th of December of 1948 when the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document came after the Second World War and represented a milestone for rebuilding human societies after the largest disaster in history and after crimes against humanity, such as the Holocaust, the Porajmos, the Japanese occupation of Manchuria, or war crimes such as the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The declaration proclaimed the inalienable right of every human being, regardless of race, colors, religion, sex, language, political, or any other opinions, national or social origin, property, birth, or different statuses. A very wide definition. But can we say there is a universal consensus on this? Not exactly, because the definition of human rights is somehow a spectrum. For the Americans, for instance, the most fundamental right is freedom, so an individual right. While for the East Asia region, I would say it's prosperity, which is a collective right. When it comes to Europe, to us, we're in the middle of our map, our European center map, and we probably swing from collective to individual. We are a bit in the middle, and for instance, health is one of the keys for us in terms of human rights, so individual and collective at the same time. This premise was needed to make it clear that when we talk about human rights, we talk about human rights in the West. And let's stick with this. So getting back to data, we have to say that today most people understand that internet technologies generate data with every single click, every like, every share. And well, we are quite comfortable in knowing this. But in the past few decades, the creation, the processing, the sharing of data have become so common that most people have stopped paying attention to the amount of data we and them give away every day. And Okay, this is not new, we said, but the difference today is that we are moving toward an unprecedented amount of data. Immersive technologies bring a new set of privacy, cybersecurity, and safety concern, and at a time when we have not fully addressed the challenges of the previous era, the internet era. So XR technologies currently being used to create virtual worlds introduce real world's risk to humans, amplified as we evolve towards what we call the metaverse. Uh, KRISTINA Podnar will later speak about policy and governance, and I don't want to step on his area of expertise, but let me say that clearly most privacy laws and data protection principles of our times are going to be probably inadequate because they don't fully address the risk related to the processing of XR data, giving way to the risk of undermining human rights. And here we come again to this term. So how XR data misuse can lead to a violation of human rights? Let's define XR data before. XR data can be defined as what's collected, inferred, processed, and shared from users and bystanders to create and facilitate immersive experiences. Much of this data is needed to enable a real immersive experience with 60 degrees of freedom, presence, persistence, and immersion. And we have various levels of information from the personally identifiable ones to the personal data. And then we come to more specific ones, such as sensor data and biometrically inferred data. When it comes to the processing and protection of personal data, even the most advanced regulations, such as the GDPR, do not explicitly include biometrically inferred data storage, disclosure, use, and misuse. And well, this is a problem because it opens to the use of indirect information to potentially access even to the ones that we decided to not share. Currently, there are no laws or regulations that address and protect the risks stemming from the collection and processing of BIDs, and a significant amount of this data is stored and tracked by XR devices manufacturers and app developers by declaring that, well, they are doing research. And in this way, they circumvent some of the limits set by laws, if any. But what kind of risks are we talking about? Because, yes, I know sometimes we sound being apocalyptic, and it's good to reduce the scope, right? So let's take a look at Article 12 of the Declaration of Human Rights, because it says that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with its privacy, family, home, or correspondence, or nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone, this is said, has the right to protection of the law against such interference or attacks. So the first direct violation of human rights then is directly the privacy intrusion. But this brings serious risks in terms of discrimination and exclusion as well. Imagine you left your country of origin, maybe a very strict one in terms of religion, and in the new country you converted to a different faith. All good, but this is something that can be easily inferred by the sensors and biometrical data and could prevent you from returning to your country of origin or could make your family refuse you. At the same time, the consequences of the workplace or in the educational field could be very significant. So I don't want to take too much of your time on this, but it's noteworthy that this discussion has been at the core of the first XR data classification roundtable that XRSI hosted on December 10th of 2021 during the XR Safety Week. On that occasion, we focused on defining the most significant context for XR data, setting the ground for deeper research. On 2 days ago, we released the roundtable report, and that's available on our website, xrsi.org. Let me just quickly share the screen so you can take note of the okay, here we are. Of the URL, xrsi.org, virtual worlds, real risks and challenges. And then let's get back to what we were saying. Because I want to inform you that in the second quarter of 2022, we will host a second roundtable. And on the website, dc.xrsi.org, you will find all the information as soon as they will be available. But there is another consideration we need to do when we talk about human rights in the metaverse, because it would be too easy, too reductive to simply apply human rights the same way to the physical and the digital level. Because we need to consider that our digital identities are not simply the carbon copy of our physical ones. Let's think about avatars. My digital representation does not necessarily match my physical appearance. I might want to represent myself as a non-sexualized being, or I might want to represent myself in a non-human form. So concepts like discrimination or the idea of minority and majority need to be rediscussed. And there is an additional issue here. Which laws apply? The ones of the country or the state where I'm based, or the place where the experiences is happening? Answering to this question in a way or in another makes a huge difference. Also because it opens to consideration about the ownership of our identity, which is even deeper than the ownership of our data. In October 2021, you all remember during Connect 2021, Facebook rebranded to Meta, and Mark Zuckerberg said that they are creating a metaverse. So A against the. In Meta's vision, a metaverse is basically just another way to call a platform. And this conducts to a vision where there is no interoperability among the nodes of this network, just like the situation is today. So my identity on Facebook is different from my identity on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And basically, my identity, in a way, belongs to the platforms. In the philosophical idea of the metaverse, our identity moves across the whole space, and it's ours without any possibility to steal or alter it, right? So the idea of having digital humans with rights is not yet part of any legislation, but something is moving on one of the most significant aspects that connect the physical and the digital. I'm talking about the mental identity, or what we often call neurorights. Neurorights are not something XR specific, let's be clear. But XR devices mark an acceleration in the need for a frame to regulate this aspect. As XR technologies evolve, the capability to read mood and emotions with mental imagery and language is already possible, or in an advanced stage of development. So the dimension of the metaverse can be summarized as a human, science, technology, artificial intelligence landscape. And this brings us to very close to the ability of deeply reach into human mind. Technology, particularly neurotechnology, enables access to the human mind for research, treatment, and other purposes. And this enabling feature is now a growing concern. So two experts like Marcello Lenca and Roberto Andorno in 2017 wrote that while the body can easily be subject to domination and control by others, the mind, along with thoughts, beliefs, and convictions, are to a large extent beyond external constraint, right? Yet, with advances in neural engineering, brain imaging, and pervasive neurotechnology, the mind might no longer be such a fortress. If we translate this to human rights, we must articulate new human rights to safeguard against these emerging threats. One of the most immediate keys is freedom of thought. Thought, not speech. Freedom of thought is one right through which mental autonomy with existing human rights laws can be protected. The only concern being that freedom of thought lacks material content and articulation in terms of claims and responsibilities. There are three elements emanating from the freedom of thoughts and opinion. The first is the right to keep your thoughts and opinion private. The second, the right not to have your thoughts and opinion manipulated. And third, the right not to be penalized for your thoughts and opinions. A discussion on neural rights includes reference to specific rights and ethical principles, right? So we talk about free will, augmentation, freedom from bias, consent, and privacy. And on the other end, specific neural rights include freedom of thought, as we said, right to identity, mental privacy, cognitive liberty, right to equal access to brain augmentation advances, and protection from algorithmic bias. All these must be included in a universal declaration on, like a new universal declaration on neural rights or digital human rights. And this human rights-based approach is propelling legal reforms. This is very exciting, very interesting. In September 2021, Chile became the first country in the world to recognize mental integrity as a right of all citizens by amending its constitution. Other efforts, especially in Europe, are underway to connect neural rights to the existing legislation and also connecting them to the principles stated in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. We started from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we said it has led to fundamental advancement in addressing crucial topics such as torture, discrimination, gender inequality, religious and political freedom, or inclusion and accessibility. Current innovation and development require additional rights to maintain human agency, autonomy, and free will. The transformation we face today and the growing complexity of the captured, stored, inferred, and transmitting data demand adopting a global framework for protecting mental well-being and neural rights as a foundation for the metaverse. At XRSI, we are taking steps in this direction thanks to the work of many experts and thanks to the interest of many regulators all over the world. And I want to pass the ball to two of the crucial actors of our effort, Valentino Megale and KRISTINA PODNAR. Just a final consideration. In October 2021, we started XRSI Europe, an independent legal body to face the challenges of XR, not only with the industry-first approach of the US, but also with the regulatory and academic approach we have here. So feel free to reach out for any kind of request, any kind of need, and I'm always happy to receive requests and open dialogue. So thank you so much, and thank you for listening.
And now I'm happy to introduce KRISTINA PODNAR, Digital Policy Sherpa NativeTrust Consulting LLC, Global Digital Policy Expert and Chair of Metaverse Reality Check, XRSI. Her speech is entitled The Power of Digital Policy in the Metaverse.
All right, well, you know what? I'm happy that we got to practice that one more time on the fly. So thank you everybody for your patience. We really appreciate it. I am going to start off by saying that I'm not going to talk about GDPR or other regulations or articles, so everybody can take a deep exhale. I'm actually going to be talking about something that I think is far more interesting for all of us, which is digital policies in the context of our work, what we're building, and the organizations that we work for. So settle in for a few minutes and let me tell you what I'm thinking and share with you my experience that I believe is relevant, not just for where we've come from, but where we're going to. You know, one of the things that I always am surprised at is we live in this environment where companies still have policies that require employees to bring in a doctor's note when they've been sick. And I often wonder to myself, how is it possible that we have to bring in a doctor's note if we're going to be sick for more than 1 or 2 days, and yet we don't actually have any kind of guidelines or requirements so much that help us understand what we're doing in our online work and our activities. I personally blame it on the breathtaking speed of the digital revolution and the disruption that it's caused. It seems like we've actually had the web for a very long time, but in reality, it hasn't been that many years when we look at other technologies that are similarly disruptive. And I think it's because nobody wanted to be left behind when we actually introduced the web. So we took this do the best we can now and figure out the rest later approach. The problem is that we didn't know that later would be 20 years away. And so here we are, not just catching up to everything that we've been doing in the web for the last 30 or so years. Now we're facing the fact that we haven't been paying attention to any of those guardrails or guidelines. And we're faced with the type of technology that none of us have ever seen before. And that being so new presents a challenge because, as Marco mentioned, not only are we in a position where we have to adjust for what's coming at us, we have to adjust and catch up for the fact that we haven't had regulations to date that are strong enough to protect us as citizens, organizations, right, including guiding the work that we do as digital designers, digital developers. And so that's really what I'm going to talk about today in terms of the dynamic that we're seeing. So in addition to being somewhat passive about what I call responsible digital management, we've also been living, as you know, in a time of significant disruption. You know, after all, most organizations and people who work inside of them are paying attention to flashy things, right? Things like NFTs that you're seeing on your screen, cryptocurrency, and the latest land grab in the metaverse. So don't get me wrong, I get very excited about all of these things as well. My point, though, is that if we are to be focused on what's happening above this waterline, right, we need to actually understand also what's happening below the line. So I look at all of these flashy new technologies, all of these flashy new capabilities, and I think to myself, what's actually under the surface, right? Because it's the same attitude that we've been taking now for 33, 34 years with the web, where we only look at pretty interfaces, pretty designs, capabilities, but under the surface, there's so much more. Yes, there's privacy, but there's also copyrights and protections and gated content based on age, and then the issue of security and monetization and visual search and accessibility, consumer protection, and so much more. So in an era where it's easy for any ship to hit an iceberg, we need to be thinking about what's above this waterline. And we need to be thinking about the opportunities that are certainly here today, those that are yet to come, but also what are the risks that will lead to the gashes in our ship's hull and literally cause our companies or ourselves to sink. And that's the one thing that keeps us up at night at XRSI. We really want to understand not just how are we doing, what are we doing, but we also want to understand how is it really going to impact all of us as we move ahead. Not a lot of people want to jump into the pool with you and talk about sexy things like AR and VR and AI or IoT. And so that, in my mind, is a really great opportunity in terms of what are we doing for opportunity and what are we doing at risk, in terms of risk. So I've been thinking about this for probably a good, I'm going to date myself now, but 22 years. So I'm getting really old. You can see by the gray in my hair. But what I've really been thinking about is how do we ensure that when we're thinking about the coming emerging technologies that make up the metaverse, when we start thinking about the human rights, like Marco shared a few minutes ago, when we think about child safety, as we're going to hear from Valentino, we also need to be thinking about who's responsible for not just developing these technologies, but who's responsible for keeping us on the straight to make sure that we can harness all of the opportunities that are coming at us with the coming metaverse, but also that we pay attention and balance those opportunities out with the risks. Now, I would love to tell you that the European Commission is going to step in and help us out. I would love to tell you that Congress in the US is nonstop thinking about this. But as you heard from Marco, the reality is that very few people are thinking about these issues these days. I wouldn't wait for the European Commission. I wouldn't wait for the Congress of the United States of America. And so I'm here today to say, I want you to commit to building a better, safer, more inclusive and more accessible technology realm, the thing that we're going to call the metaverse that's coming at us. And I personally want to challenge you, whether you're a designer, whether you're a developer, or you're just working inside of an organization, to take on the responsibility, the accountability, and work together within this ecosystem to build out the digital policies we need to balance out the risks and the opportunities. Now, people say to me, like, you're a little bit crazy. How do you think that organizations can actually help this out? Or how can I, as a sole developer or sole designer, move mountains? Well, here's the thing. You can't move mountains on your own, but you can be the instigator and you can actually move mountains when we collectively band together. And so on your screen, you're seeing the capture of 22 years worth of methodology around digital policy as it applies to enterprises, as it applies to every organization that's out there. First of all, who within an organization right, is responsible for digital policy? Well, we can't always rely on lawmakers and regulators, as we've seen. We can't wait for them to act because they may not act, or they may not act in time. And so it's really up to each one of us in the organization to take that role on. And I fundamentally believe that each enterprise, each entity needs to have something that we call a digital policy steward, somebody who is the final line of defense against those risks, and yet somebody who really understands deeply what are the opportunities that are coming at us. Because here's the thing, the reality is that none of us want to take on 100% of safety, right? If we did 100% of safety, we would just say, let's not build a metaverse, let's shut down digital, let's not do anything. But that's not the reality we live in. So what we really need to do is understand where the risks are okay and acceptable and where they're not. For example, if I'm inside of my enterprise or inside of my organization and I'm testing out a technology, it might be okay for me and a group of 20 of my colleagues to risk our personal data in that prototype. What's probably not okay is for me to unleash that prototype on the universe and put your privacy and your safety and your personal information and your personal rights at risk, right? So knowing when to apply the tolerance for risk is critical. And so we ought to have somebody inside of our enterprises, what I call this digital policy steward, who is understanding the business operations, understanding the objectives of the organization, understanding, you know, what are we trying to do with these immersive technologies, this digital capability that's coming at us. Somebody who has overall people skills, investigative skills. In fact, you know, somebody like Marco, if I'm thinking about it honestly. But also with a dose of persistence and an understanding of how we piece things like AR and VR and AI and IoT and 5G and just all of these different technologies together. And that person needs to work what I call these digital policy authors and digital workers to understand what is the right thing to do. How do we create what I call that framework that allows us to create and innovate and always do things without having to raise our hand and say, "Mother, may I?" Right? You don't have to always ask for permission, because if we can create that framework that is safe, we know we're not going to break rules, we're not going to break things, we're not going to put people's safety and privacy at risk, then we can create a world where we actually have the ability to innovate. We actually have the ability to collaborate. We have the ability to run really fast, knowing we're not going to break things. And so that's really the collaboration that happens in the entity or the organization, along with end users and day-to-day digital workers. So that's the critical thing that I think most organizations are missing today. And it's because we haven't been paying attention to it with traditional web technologies, and we're certainly not ready to take on what's coming next. And so in this crazy world, right, that we're in, how do you bring it all together? If you're, I don't know, perhaps somebody who is consulting, you're in a consulting agency, or maybe you're supporting a design aspect of an upcoming technology within your organization, what should you be doing? What should you be thinking about doing? Well, we talk about regulation and policy and helping lawmakers. And at XRSI, we're certainly focused on that. But we also want to enable organizations. We want to enable you and your colleagues to freely work and freely innovate. And so this is a program that you can actually start to think about. And it's not very complex. Again, it requires just somebody who has the mindset of a librarian, who can kind of see the big picture, right? They can ask the right questions, not maybe somebody who knows how to develop an NFT, but can ask the questions like, hey, which blockchain should we use? Or if we're going to dabble in cryptocurrency, how should we go about that? Like, what is the right space to be in to do trading, right? So questions that we need to be asking in the enterprise are the role of the steward. The digital policy author has the knowledge and the insight, usually because they've been in this space. They've been developing, they've been designing, or maybe even they're one of these, what I call purple unicorns. There's somebody who's a digital native, they're a lawyer that doesn't actually have experience with emerging technologies and what the metaverse will be, but what they do know is some of the risks that we can possibly face, and they know enough that we don't want to encounter those risks as a company. And so they can work with a digital policy author and the steward to do things like go ahead and gather the necessary approvals. Don't stress, I can't stress enough how important it is to get official stamp of approval in every entity to develop policies. Make sure that you're implementing them. I work inside of organizations every day, and the one thing that I don't ever like to see is a really long PDF document sitting on SharePoint or your intranet that tells people like you and me what we have to do, right? If we're going to do augmented reality or virtual reality, what do we need to do? I don't want to hear GDPR Article 13. I don't want to hear GDPR Article 19 because it makes people's brains explode. What I want for digital workers like you and me to see is, hey, when you create this type of avatar, think about accessibility. Does every avatar need to have 2 legs and 2 arms? I don't know. Does every human have 2 legs and 2 arms? No. Some people don't have a leg. Some people are in a wheelchair. Some people can't hear. Some people can't see. Some people like me are just getting old because I've been in this space for a long time and I have carpal tunnel. And so how you depict me and what I can do in my virtual world matters because I don't always have the ability to manipulate with my hands the way I would want to. So think about those aspects. Really get those implemented into your organization so that, yes, we're thinking about privacy, we're thinking about safety, but we're also thinking about accessibility. We're thinking about inclusivity, whether it's because there are people in far parts of the world that don't have the kind of broadband we all have access to today. Or perhaps they have different types of inclusivity needs because they don't want to reveal certain aspects of their privacies that are important and that will put them at risk physically or mentally or emotionally in this new world of the metaverse. And so I'm very, very passionate about this because I think it's not just about creating these policies, but it's about implementing them and getting everybody to adopt them. And so at XRSI, when we're thinking about advising regulators, getting them to create new laws, that's one path. But you and your business and your organization need to be a partner in that process. Without that, it's going to be a very lopsided world. It's not going to be a very fun world. And it's not going to be a world in which we can operate, create, and evolve the way that we want to. And so I'm going to call you out. I'm going to say, hey, think about a program like this, wherever you work. Think about getting the necessary approvals, implementing the new policies. Think about implementing those policies in a way that people can actually apply them to their work. Think about how you're going to maintain those policies. How are people going to find them? Are they going to be usable? Just remember that policies need to be easy to use. They need to allow individuals to self-service, to have access to information. But most of all, remember that each one of us, most likely, wants to do the right thing, whether it's in today's digital world or in the metaverse. The challenge is we don't necessarily know what the right thing is. So let's start thinking about it now. Let's start architecting for that now. So not only do we do the right thing, but we do the right thing by every citizen, making sure that we include them. And that includes you, and that includes me, and everybody else around the globe. So my parting words to you are these, and it's a bit of a challenge. In a world where we find ourselves faced with risk and opportunity today, we not only have to worry about what we're doing in digital operations at the moment, we have to think about what's coming. The metaverse is an evolution like we've never seen before, and you can continue to kind of pay attention to what's above that surface, right? Think about the top of the iceberg, or you can kind of take a step back and say, look, our ship is heading for that iceberg. There's a lot more underneath the waterline that's going to put us at risk. And I want to see the whole picture, and I want to enable not just somebody else out there. I don't want to just contribute to XRSI, although I invite you to do that, and I implore you to please do that. But I also want you to understand that as an individual, as a citizen, you have the opportunity to choose the risk or the opportunity. And you also have the responsibility to help us get it right. And so rise to the challenge today. We invite you to rise to the challenge as we journey ahead, and please join us. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. It was an amazing speech. I've seen also in the chat many people are complimenting you for what you're saying. So thanks again. It was great. And now it's time to try again with Valentino. I won't introduce him again because I already did it before and I'm pretty lazy, but he's an amazing guy. So he will talk with us about the child relationship with the metaverse.
Hi, everybody.
So Valentino, your stage is yours and good luck.
Thank you. Let's go. All right. So, hi, everybody. Thanks for your time. Thanks for my colleagues from the XRSI and to Anthony and Cecilia for hosting this session. To introduce the topic that will focus on child safety in the metaverse, let's start from reflecting how children and teenagers use space. So space is the context for their key activities, which is learning, playing, socializing, and entertaining. These activities start in the physical world, like home, public venues, and schools. And in every setting, children present basically natural vulnerabilities to potential risks that can be physical, emotional, and social. But in a lot of cases in the physical world, adults are still present, and their overview is significant to avoid or limit those risks in the most of cases. But of course, today, physical spaces are only the beginning. Young users have technology, often mobile, so delocalized, to access the internet and continue all these activities on several kinds of platforms, from multiplayer games to social network. So adult overview starts to fade in the online world, and but they still share the same perspective on the digital content, and they could intervene sometime in specific situations when they see something worry is happening. But today, a new step is possible, thanks to immersive technologies, where virtual content is experienced in first person wearing a VR headset. So in this case, young users and parents don't share the same perspective. And the vulnerability of children is exposed to only their ability to manage every challenge, every risk. So this additional aspect of immersive technologies is also that the same hardware, VR headsets, are used not only to provide the content, but also to collect data about every kind of interaction between children and the scenario. And this put tech providers, content providers in a very privileged position to not only engage children, but also quantify their experience. And if you can measure something, you can not only improve, but you can guide that something towards goals that are meaningful to you, in this case, tech providers and content providers. And this is exactly where the discussion should start, in my opinion, to go through the topic of the child safety in the metaverse. Okay. So when we talk of virtual reality and generally speaking of immersive technologies, we are dealing with a cognitive technology, which is designed to engage our mind through synthetic but realistic sensory stimulation thanks to the immersive perspective. And at the same time, we are dealing with a persuasive technology, which means that by influencing the users' minds, the goal is to influence their behavior, like movements, choices, reactions, feelings, cognitive states. And when it comes to young users using VR, we are basically providing such a persuasive technology and content to users that presents natively more vulnerabilities to similar persuasion and processes. So their ability to control themselves and the events, their ability to decide and even to opposite to something they don't want is still weak in most of cases, even from a physiological point of view. So with the increasingly diverse population using VR, we need definitely to reflect and better define what contents are suitable to be provided to the different age groups of the population that have different needs, different vulnerabilities profiles, and different conditions. Today, age limitations can be found on tech providers' manuals, like 13 years old limits. But honestly, this limit is not based on a specific evidence-based data that can justify this particular age as an objective limit. Recently, the UK, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, introduced a very interesting documentation about age-appropriate design of digital content, which is definitely worth to check and can be partially used as a benchmark of compliance. But as also anticipated by Marco before, immersive experiences provide additional complexity and deserves to be addressed with specific guidelines. I mean that the ongoing guidelines should be expanded, augmented, just like augmented technology, with specific points to be taken into consideration. So, and VR and the future metaverse, because the metaverse is the future convergence of VR with many other technologies, of course, does not limit to single users. Today, it's a connected experience. Users can visit virtual venues and share that space with other visitors from wherever around the globe. And exactly like we do on social media, of course, this is exactly what we are doing with social media. But basically, thanks to the virtual reality, to the immersive perspective, it is enhanced on an emotional level. The entire experience is made more compelling and impactful. And so we can say that VR is basically increasingly a social shared experience. So when we are dealing with safety topics of young generation in the virtual spaces, we need to acknowledge that social dynamics could play a significant role, both in positive ways, so we can build social cohesion, we can build positive communities, but also in negative ones. And this is definitely a very tricky and challenging aspect, because we are still unable to effectively manage sociality online today, with many threats that we know very well emerging constantly from the misuse of social media and many other platforms. Some of these threats have already emerged in virtual spaces and have been recorded recently by realities entities like the Center for Countering Digital Hate, like abusive behaviors, minors' exposition to graphic sexual content, harassment, racist talking, mocking, bullying. So something that Meta, for instance, recently addressed, introducing a feature in form of mandatory distance between VR avatars. But I think this is exactly the problem. Platforms are not built with safety by design countermeasures, but risks are often addressed with after measures. So as reactions to the public opinion that is shocked by something, but at the same time, from the tech provider perspective, that the same public opinion should be persuaded that everything is okay, is under control, because that same public is full of potential customers. But the point is that there is no ethical core in the development of VR and metaverse platform, because safety is still a gray area. And because of that, all platforms are easily exposed to individual and social challenges, threats, and risks. And as said before, XR offers the unique opportunity to provide compelling experience on an emotional, cognitive level, but at the same time, they offer the opportunity to quantify these experiences with very diverse data that can be collected during the session. And these are not only data about how users interact with the screen. They are literally data that act like behavioral scans of the individuals and can be used to profile his behavior, can be converted into a digital model to study how manipulate individuals. So how this condition can be approached when it comes to young users, because children can be exposed to behavioral scans and profiled in ways totally unseen before. Of course, a profilation can be used also to build behaviors, not only to provide, but also to build behaviors, to persuade, as we said, to build preferences, to build meaning in vulnerable populations and in a vulnerable age group represented by children. So data, the same data can be used as feedback, for instance, potentially useful to improve the overall immersive experience. And this is very important because, for instance, in medicine and healthcare, it would be amazing to collect data from immersive experiences and personalize this therapeutic experience to the conditions of final users, especially if they are children. But just a reflection, what are the real needs of children? And what about using those data and optimize an experience to an age group that we don't know what are the real needs of that age group? Because probably all the data that have been collected with VR have been built upon a large population, mainly adult. So what if content experienced by young users would be optimized based on a model built on an adult audience? And obviously, how can we acknowledge and prevent data exploitation in case of young users? There are many critical issues on that side. And we talked about privacy, appropriate content, social safety, but there is another key aspect, which is health safety in virtual spaces. This is important because VR, thanks to users embodying a virtual avatar and exploring in a first-person the scenario, the overall experience makes the immersive experience very compelling and realistic to our brain. VR literally puts our brain in motion, feeding our internal representation of reality with synthetic stimuli, and it's able to trigger compensation processes useful to adapt our perception and our behavior to this new temporary reality. Our brain basically builds its circuitry based on sensory data. And in the adult users, brain constantly adapts its perception and behaviors to ever-changing environments, thanks to processes like neuroplasticity. But in the young users, it is still defining its core circuitry. And some of this configuration will follow us for the entire life. So what does it mean to influence this process, exposing children to different realities? Sometimes experiences that are even not optimized to children. So what could be the impact of virtual reality exposition on sight, on spatial navigation, on behavior? All these kind of impacts depends from variables like time of exposure, quality of the experience, and typology of the experience. So at the moment, we don't have objective scientific data to demonify VR. This is important to say, but definitely more data is needed to justify trust and also specific limitations. So in lack of data, lacking all this data, caution is very important in terms of time of exposure, quality, and kind of content. So now when we look at virtual reality, when virtual reality is looked from the outside, virtual reality appears as a VR headset put on our face, and the experience is invisible. This perspective, of course, is the origin of both negative and positive misinterpretations of VR. But in the case of young users, parents are not able to share their same experience and can be impacted by different kinds of biases in front of technology. It's difficult to them to understand whether it is a good experience or a negative experience. It's difficult to them to sound the alarm when needed. At the same time, parents are the first guardians, so the first that could prevent risks and help young users cope with any challenge. So parents cannot be passive. They are required to play a proactive role. To reach this point, tech awareness is needed. So informing and empowering parents are very important, meaningful initial step to build safer virtual experiences. Of course, the parents' population is diverse, as diverse could be any kind of population, and information should consider this aspect to reach effectively the final audience. But once parents become aware, they also need real and actionable tools like parental controls features, tools to filter content, or even to manage access to content. These features are still missing in the main VR platforms. So a wider discussion is definitely important to integrate those features in VR software and in VR devices by tech providers. So what is the role of tech providers? Tech providers are definitely the commercial interface between the available tech and the end users. As I said before, the age limit is often stated as 13 years old, but this is mainly the result of tech providers willing to be compliant with the so-called COPPA, but it's not about evidence-based data justifying this limit, but this is mainly because they want to avoid any complication linked with data management and data use related to young users, as defined by COPPA regulation. So this kind of statement is not oriented towards the safety of the young users, of the end users, but it's oriented to protect the need of the company. So this is probably not enough, because this highlights the design process is focused not on the user, but on the company. So this is far from promoting ethical approaches. At the moment, safety comes as a reaction, as an additional layer that is added only in case of a problem, which is of course too late in most of cases. And in the end, while tech providers of course design how final immersive experience can be used, content creators design those experiences. So they definitely provide their creativity or technical skills, but they also provide choice. They choose what to design and how to provide to the final users. Of course, with the growing user space in VR, they need to acknowledge that there is no one population in the audience. There are different age groups, there are different populations requiring different solutions. So similarly to parents, knowledge is the king. Content creators need guidance. They need evidence-based information in order to guide their choices, to guide their creative and technical processes while delivering their final products. And of course, they also need very transparent and clear regulation in order to understand how to make end products a good fit for the market, but especially for the end users. So to build a safer metaverse for young users, it's important to convert all these reflections into action. So to achieve this goal, as anticipated also by Marco and Cristina, at XRSI, we launched different chapters dedicated to different verticals. In this case, we launched also the Child Safety Initiative. So we're focused on research, because XR technologies and their use is growing, and there is still a lot to understand when dealing with a huge population. We engage subject matter experts, policymakers, families, companies, tech providers to listen the different perspectives, but also to understand the different needs and the design together in order to design and create together this common perimeter of safety and privacy. And based on this information, we are working to design and launch a framework for child safety in XR and in the metaverse, which is something already available in its first version. You can find it on the site, but we are working to improve it and spread it globally to inform governments, companies, and users of such guidelines. So this is an initiative open to communities' insight and contribution. So everyone interested to contribute, please check our website and contact us through the dedicated form. Just before the end, just a couple of material to start from. On December, we organized the XR Safety Week, 5 days dedicated to different iterations of safety in XR. Day 2 was dedicated to child safety, and we hosted international speakers addressing the topic, each one with very specific expertise and professional background. So check the website for the complete agenda. All the speeches are available as YouTube videos. And of course, you can also join us and join the conversation on our Twitter profile. We're very active, so please contribute there as well. So thank you. If there are any questions, and here we are. Luckily, it worked. Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Valentino. This was a great speech, and we are happy that you managed to fix all your problems.
Thank you.
Now it's time for the debate. I will just ask a first question to everyone because we are really tight on time. I'll start with KRISTINA. There is a theme that I like to always bring to the table. That is the one of the rights also of NPCs, of AI elements. So what are the rights and the duties of when you're in the metaverse and there are some people that are real, but others are controlled maybe by an artificial intelligence? So what do you think are the rights and the duties also of these entities?
Thank you for the question. I think that's such a great one. I think we've discussed this before, but you know, I think we need to really understand NPCs in terms of, you know, what they are, which is no minds and no feelings. But we need to also be thinking about, is it possible to have algorithmic suffering, which is maybe more of a theoretical and ethical question than it is anything else. But I think it's really important to ask ourselves that and consider not just the risks that come from NPC action and, you know, the ability to create policies right from the start, but also think about, you know, what are the consequences to individuals? How do we think about, you know, our individuals, our actions, what's ethical, what's moral, what are the boundaries that I talked about that we want to set? And then from there, decide, you know, what ought to be the rules and what rights ought to be afforded to individuals, to NPCs, to algorithms, and anybody else. I think it's not a clear yes or no answer. I think it's much more involved. What I do know, though, and what I fundamentally believe is, again, need to look below the surface at the implications of that and really ask the subject matter experts, you know, what are the implications? What are the consequences? What might we not be thinking about? Are the neurological and behavior changes that as a society and as citizens we will encounter if we continue to allow bad things or even good things to happen to NPCs? And then based on that type of input, we need to actually make up our minds of where those guardrails need to be placed.
Okay, thank you. That was a very interesting answer, and I'm very intrigued by the team. Marco, you know that we have a team we like to talk together, and it's China. That is a country we have some connections. And you talk about, you know, the rights in the metaverse for Western countries. So let's go to the Far East. What do you think about the Chinese metaverse that maybe they're building?
Ah, but this sounds like like how could I say, retribution from you, Anthony. This is the same question I I made you 2 weeks ago. No, not exactly, but apart from
Yours was
jokes.
better.
No, but this is very difficult. So the point is again. The definition of rights is very different, and basically the idea is that we should probably consider something like a decoupling in this direction. So actually, this is already happening, not exactly in technical terms, but if we get back to the start of the commercial war or the trade war between US and China in 2018, we can see that the trend is to have two different lines of development. Someone also thinks we're gonna have two different internets. So I don't think so, because this is bad for trade. And behind the trade war, there is common trade interests of both the parts. So both want to continue to have business together. But in terms of regulation, I must say I'm very curious to see where the PIPL will go. The Chinese privacy policy, the Chinese privacy regulation and data management regulation that was published in 2021, and that it's surprisingly similar to GDPR in terms of approach. So where the regulation will stop and the power will start, or vice versa, and how the companies will be held responsible to what will be done. This kind of approach will define probably the kind of digital human rights we will see in that environment. And that's a very interesting environment, even if, as we were discussing with Anthony a few weeks ago, Metaverse is not the trending topic in innovation in China yet. So probably they will also be able to learn from some of our approaches and mistakes, if any.
We hope so. So thanks, Marco. It was also a complicated question also because China is always difficult to understand and to explain. So there was a great answer. Valentino, I just want to close with you since you talk about, medical safety, etc. There is always that usual debate about VR and now about the metaverse, about how it's healthy for people, what will be the future, people will escape from reality by just living inside the metaverse. Some people are already scared about this concept. So what about the mental health of people that will be in the metaverse?
I think that the key of a healthy use of every kind of innovation, not only the metaverse, not only immersive technologies, but also BCI in the future, neurotechnology, any kind of technology, is balance with our physical reality. Probably the concept of reality will be put at risk. I always say not reality and stop, but physical reality, virtual reality, digital reality, and so on. But as we can see also working with patients, sometimes using empowering imagination with new technologies like immersing patients in virtual reality can be empowering to them and can help them manage physical issues, physical critical procedures, painful medical procedures, and so on. So I think there is a huge potential in the metaverse, and I mean in the immersive technologies first, but a healthy use means a balanced use. Balanced in terms of time of exposure, as I said before. So that means, short, purposeful time of exposure is good, but addictive, long, and without purpose use is something that is bad, but for any kind of activity. Of course, any kind of activity without a purpose that just starts to take every second of our life becomes an addiction. So this is true also for our daily physical activities. And also considering the critical issues linked to the content. What is the purpose of a content and how we deliver the content to the final users. So the reflections the reflections that we did today is very important to establish what are the needs of young users, as in case of my speech, but general users, and why we want to experience immersive content. Because, imagination, this is something that we always use in many kind of activities. We express our imagination with arts, and even arts is a sort of simulation. But there is always a healthy way to use imagination or unhealthy ways to use imagination. This is a discussion wider and bigger than just technology.
Okay, thank you, Valentino. Thanks all the speakers and everyone. I just invite to the stage Cecilia for saying you the final goodbye. So, Cecilia, it's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you, KAVYA. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Cristina. Thank you, Valentino. Thank you all. AWE USA 2022 taking place in Santa Clara, California, June 1 to 3. Primarily as in a person conference and also with an online element. Thank you all for being here. See you soon at the next Nite Florence event. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.